The Art Center inspires creativity and contributes to
community well-being
through equitable access to
and engagement with visual arts.
We collaborate to offer exhibitions,
learning opportunities, artist development,
and cultural events centered on
art, artists, and art enthusiasts in the greater Corvallis area.
Hi, welcome to TAC Makes a Podcast. I'm Jenny Castle, the Associate Director and Curator at the Art Center in Corvallis, Oregon. Today I had the pleasure of talking with Anne Chadwick, whose exhibition Habitat is on view in the Corrine Woodman Gallery this month. Anne's work is deeply connected to place, specifically the Pacific Northwest. And in this episode, we talk about the inspiration she finds in nature, her passion for environmental conservation, and her approach to making large-scale paper works. Enough from me, let's hear from Anne.
I started at the University of Washington and then ended up back in Eastern Washington, and where my family is from. Going back and forth across the state as much as I have, I just feel like I know every square foot between here and there, east and west and north and south. And my father had a degree in forestry from the University of Idaho. So when I grew up, my parents would take my sister and I camping up in northern Idaho, and we would be at Priest Lake up there where they have, these incredible forests. And my father would take my sister and I hiking, and he would name the names of all the trees. And so it was just something that was kind of part of what my family did. And when we went on vacations, we would always come over here and go to the coast. We would go up to the rainforest, or actually we went a lot of places around down to the Grand Canyon and, the national parks. Well, when I grew up, everybody went to the national parks. So that's what we did. So, that's set the seeds. But my main interest in what I'm doing now really happened after I retired from teaching for 22 years at the local community college. And my husband and I moved here to Samish Island. And Samish Island is on an estuary. And I would walk the estuary in the morning and got to know the people on the island. I started hearing all these complaints that there were too many trees in the view. And I thought trees were a view. Right. So that kind of one thing led to another. And then I decided that maybe I better know more about this place that I live. So I signed up for a class they're called Salish Sea stewards. And it was a class of about 30 adults. And they brought in people from the University of Washington, from Western, from San Juan Island, like the Whale Museum. We had state people that were there. They gave lectures, and it was a course you took for 6 weeks. And at the end of 6 weeks, after you had heard lectures about everything from invasive green crabs, to preserving waterways by getting rid of beach debris, all of these different ways in which the environment was being impacted by the way that we live. And at the end of those 6 weeks, because it was free, you would give them 50 hours of your time to community service. And so that's what I did. And I joined 2 groups. One of them was a heron foraging study, where I would go from May to October twice in a month, and I would count herons, and I would monitor where they were flying from, what they were eating. We kept track of what was happening at the heronry when they were the young were born, the count of the young. That was one thing I got involved with. And then the other thing I got involved with was a medium debris beach monitoring through the COAST program at the University of Washington. And that's a group of people all up and down the West Coast, from Southern California all the way up to Canada, that keep track of what comes in the beaches. That some of them monitor dead birds. We monitored plastics, and you can't imagine what comes in on a beach. Well, you probably can't.
Yeah,
it's pretty amazing.
I've done a few beach cleans, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah, I felt like I could create my work around what I was finding out about the places in which I live. And part of that was looking at specific habitats. And for this exhibit, I was very much interested in the Gary Oak habitat. We have some old ones here on the island, but they are, from Northern California really up to Vancouver Island. There used to be a lot of them, but now they are a threatened habitat, and they provide so much resource for plant and animal species. And I just felt like this was something that I wanted to make my work about. So that's, in focusing on this exhibit, that's what this particular piece called Habitat is about.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Gary Oak? And kind of harkening back to what you said, people were complaining about how many trees that they could see in their view. And in your artist statement, you talk a little bit about trees that grow faster and then are kind of taking over these habitats. And so what's special about the Gary Oak and why is it so endangered?
Well, the first thing is it's the only native oak to the Northwest. So it can only be found in this area. And it grows in where it's kind of an area that's a little bit arid in the summertime, but then it can be wet in the wintertime. And it's a very, very slow growing tree. And it has a very, very dense bark. And that dense bark gives it a protection. So, for instance, if there's fire, it protects the tree from the fire. So fire is a really important part of the habitat. And up until we had settlers that came into the Northwest, a lot of the native tribes would actually burn these sort of prairies or savannas that grew up around the Gary Oak because there were specific plants like the camas plant that provided food. So they would do periodic burnings. And then what would come up would be like camas and the chocolate lily. And these are plants that provided not only food, but medicine as well. So it really became a part of the tribal life. And the Gary Oaks that were in Northern California were a little bit different than the ones that were up in the Vancouver Island area, because they sort of shifted so that they would survive well in whatever habitats they were in. And they attracted certain kinds of species, like the Proteus dusky-winged butterfly is a butterfly that only lives on Gary Oak. It plants itself in between the really dense bark that's around the outside of it, and its pupae grow in the grasses that are underneath the tree. And so it has a symbiotic relationship with the tree. And there's a lot of other threatened species that are also part of that landscape. That there's mosses and lichens that are on the tree that provide food for deer. There are wide branches and large knotholes that provide resting, perching places for a variety of birds. The Lewis woodpecker is another bird that's threatened at this time, and it lives in the habitat of the Gary Oak tree. Those acorns that grow on the tree provide a lot of food for squirrels and voles, and the deer eat all of the green moss on the side. So if there's a cougar around, they can eat the deer. So it's just an amazing habitat. It also is a beautiful habitat because it is kind of savanna or prairie-like. So you don't have the large Douglas oak or the spruce or the yew trees. And those trees are much faster growing. And so they're one of the reasons that we see a lot of that habitat changing. But primarily, the habitat is changing because when the settlers came into the area, first of all, they didn't like fire. And so they took a lot of the trees down and turned it into agricultural landscape. And of course, a lot of farms were built that turned into cities and towns. So those sort of moved out these very special prairie habitat areas.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about the medium that you choose to work in. And has that been how you've, like, the type of artwork you've made throughout your career, or did that shift as well when you retired? Have you been doing paper artwork for a long time throughout your career?
Since 2008.
Okay.
And since I'm in my 70s, I guess you can kind of tell.
It just depends, right? On how you look at it. So you switched over to cutting to paper cuts. Like what caused that transition, and how is that speaking to the subject matter you're really interested in now?
Well, I had a fortuitous trip up to Vancouver, and my husband and I went to the Vancouver Art Gallery, and I saw an exhibition of Chinese paper cut. I had painted a painting of a little dead bird when my mother passed away, and it was just sort of floating in this big white space. And I thought, I want something more in that space. And after I saw that show, I thought, I'm going to cut some paper and make kind of a border around it. And paper is so dynamic when it's colored paper, when it's next to white paper. It's very graphic. Mm-hmm. So that's one reason why I moved towards it initially. But there were two other reasons why. One is that it's Black, which I think is rather funereal. And there's something sort of Victorian about a lot of the portraits that were created with cut paper, and I found them very attractive. I liked the kind of 19th century funereal feel, because I thought, I'm just going to cut in Black paper until things turn around with climate change. And then when it turns around, I'll start cutting on the red paper. And then the other thing is that I realized how fragile it is. You know, paper, if you bend it, has a memory that you can't remove. And I liked the fragility in it. Now, I do a lot of paper cuts that I frame to protect them. What I like doing are the larger cut paper installations, because I think they make a bigger impact. And I can say more with them that way. This piece, Habitat, I feel that about, that it has a scale to it, mm-hmm. But it still is a very, very fragile piece.
I haven't seen all of the work yet, but then you said you're going to create an installation for us. I'm very excited to see it in person. And then you have a couple of smaller framed work that you're also bringing. Can you talk a little bit about your choice to frame some of these pieces and the difference in scale, and why you're putting them all together in a single exhibition?
I felt like I should have something for sale.
That's a very practical answer.
Both of the smaller pieces that I have done call back to the large installation piece, in that I've used some of the species that I use in the large piece in these smaller pieces. So they're just another way of focusing on specifically on single species that are also included in the larger piece.
Yeah, I would think, the viewing of a smaller paper cut piece would be much more intimate. You have to get much closer to it to see the detail. But I'm assuming making it is also maybe even more laborious, like to make these really small, intricate cuts. So, I mean, this might seem like an overly simple question, but like the hours it takes to create one of these delicate little pieces is probably immense.
I cut out pieces before I cut out the final piece. Mm-hmm. So I was figuring out the piece with this. And you can see that it's not that delicate. I mean, it's cut out, and it's possibly want to know about cutting paper. But it's, I'm not cutting teeny tiny little pieces like some paper cut artists do.
Is there anything special about the paper you choose, depending on the subject matter you're exploring? You said Black, but that looks like pretty rigid paper.
This is.
Yeah.
This is very rigid, 250 pound. It's Arches, which actually I can't find the large paper any longer. Arches was sold years ago, and so it's very difficult to find paper that's big enough.
Right.
Because when I'm doing wall installations, I want big sheets of paper. So I have to make a lot of smaller pieces now that I just make into something big when I can.
Do you ever make your own paper?
I have made paper in the past.
Okay. Yeah.
But I do not make my own paper now.
You've gone a different direction.
Yeah. That's too laborious, and I would need a completely different studio. I have a very simple studio for cutting paper. I don't need a sink.
No, yeah. Yeah. Table and a wall, right? That's all you need. Maybe some good light. So, I mean, the marks that you make, there's kind of this repetitive looping that kind of happens in a lot of your work.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen digital images of several of your pieces, and the style I feel like is consistent. Can you talk a little bit about the stylization that you're using to, I mean, you're referencing real ecology, and you've done a lot of research about these different types of trees and different types of animals. So there's some kind of scientifically illustrative about the work, but you've stylized it in a way that is really unique. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the influences that have brought you to that style?
I think my work is very graphic.
Mm-hmm.
And I am attracted to certain ways in which I draw angles. And I know when I've drawn it right. And I know exactly how my arm moves when I draw it. And so I usually use a lot of sweeping lines and angles. When I start a piece, I really look at any kind of species or specifics about the piece that I'm going to be working with first. So I have to know what it is that I'm going to be drawing. And drawing is a major part of it. I've had people say to me, well, it's too bad you don't draw. But I mean, everything that I do is drawn.
Yeah.
And when I have an idea of what I want to do, as I pointed out, I kind of do a mock-up first of what it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And then I start putting it all together on larger sheets.
Oh my
So I often do it on white paper first, and then I'll lay it on the back of a piece of black paper, and I'll move my drawing around, trying different angles until I like what I'm seeing. And once I know how I want to lay it out, then I might start putting in some of those more sweeping lines in some way to connect it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a combination of more pieces that tend to have more realism in them, and then angles and lines that are far more abstract.
I love imagining you like exploring an ecosystem and you like discovering how they can be symbiotic while you're in your studio. It sounds like a really beautiful and meditative process.
It is. And last year I did a piece about snow geese that are destroying the wetlands here in Skagit County. We're getting so many snow geese in the year because of our agricultural fields, and because the snow geese who used to go to California in the wintertime now come here because heat is moving north. And so in the night or in the daytime, they're out in the agricultural fields. And then at night, they go into the wetlands and they root out all of the wet grasses and sedges, and they eat all of the underneath them, all of the root systems and the bulbs. And so it's destroying what's holding the wetlands together. And I worked with 2 scientists on that. And so that was great because I got to go out and march with them around, in the wetlands. So I really like working with somebody when I can. I did ask a friend who's a plant pathologist a bit about the piece that I'm working on for the Art Center, but I didn't get to work directly with anybody here.
I'm really excited to have your exhibition with us in April. Is there any other exhibitions or things you want to share with the people who are listening? Other works that you're going to be exhibiting in the near future?
Really interested in just doing some pieces about trees. So we have a lot of western red cedar here on the island that have been threatened because it's been very dry or drier than normal. And throughout the San Juans, actually, we've had a lot drier weather in the summertime. And so we're seeing that a lot of the cedar trees are suffering from the drought. So I'll probably be focusing a lot on cedar trees. I'm also probably going to be doing something about the understory that grows beneath a lot of the trees that are here locally as well. So that's what I'm hoping to tackle in the near future.
And thank you so much for talking with me today.
Well, thank you for letting me talk. I really appreciate it, Jenny.
No, the insight that you've given to this exhibition, I think, will only elevate people's experience. And I'm really excited to be hosting you at the Art Center in April.
I look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you for listening to TAC Makes. This is a new creative project at the Art Center, and I hope you enjoy our learning curve as much as we do. You can find more episodes on YouTube and Spotify and on our website, theartscenter.net. That's arts with an S.